So shall we start? Miss Saija, are you there?
Yes, sir. Yeah, we can start.
Right, right. Thank you. So welcome to another edition of Books and Coffee this evening with us for Friday Fiesta. This is our ninth edition, and we have had a glorious past, sessions thus far. And this evening we have five wonderful delegates with us who are ready to go. And we'll start with Professor Saija Shankar, Assistant Professor, Department of English, Stella Maris College, Chennai, followed by Ms. Sangamitra Nataraj, who is a second MA English student at Madras Christian College, Chennai, followed by Mr. Avichi Krishnan, and he's a film enthusiast and a professor from Madurai, followed by Miss Sumadi, again a professor of English, Sri Venkateshwara College of Arts and Science, Gauri Vakam, Chennai. And then the last delegate would be Miss Senya Vale, who is doing a final year English in QMC or Queen Mary's College, Chennai. So without much ado, I'll just give you a very short introduction who we are. And we are a little group of readers who share whatever we read. In 2017, we formed a little group. We call it the Lovely Garden of Readers. And then we believe in the dictum that we share whatever we read and then we grow together. And with this in mind, we have professors, research scholars, and PG students also from all across the nation, should I say. And then we also have a lot of other reading sessions there, a lot of poetry sessions there. Poets would give their poems also there. So it's a wonderful garden. And I'm happy to have you all with us this evening as part of Readers Rendezvous. Without much ado, let me hand over the session straight away to Miss Saija Shankar. Over to you, Miss Saija Shankar.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, everyone. So today I'm going to be talking about a book called The Salt Roads. I'm going to share my screen, so just can one of you let me know if you can see it?
Yes, you are visible, Saija.
Yeah.
Yes, now, right, yes.
Okay. So the text that I've chosen that I would like to talk to all of you about is called The Salt Roads. It's written by a Jamaican Canadian author called Nalo Hopkinson, and I had read it like pretty recently. So when Christina had asked me, which book I would be interested in talking about, this was the one that sort of immediately came to mind. So Nalo Hopkinson is a Jamaican Canadian. So she was born in Jamaica, and she moved to Canada at the age of 16. But she had a huge transition in in moving from Jamaica to Canada, and she sort of says that she went through a culture shock. And even though, I mean, while she was in Jamaica, her parents were in the literary circles over there. Her dad was a Guyanese poet and her mom was a library technician. So she knew those literary circles in Guyana. And she uses a lot of African Caribbean folk and fairy elements in her writing. Though I have read only this one, The Salt Roads, this is something that's typical of her writing. She's written another very popular book called Skin Folk. She's also worked along with Neil Gaiman to produce a later edition of his Sandman series, very recently out. And yeah, so she uses a lot of these themes of folk and fairy stories in her writing, and that sort of establishes her as a writer of speculative fiction, or so fantasy, science fiction, that kind of combination of speculative fiction. So that is Nalo Hopkinson, and she's a very interesting writer. She is also extremely prominent in the LGBTQIA circles, and she incorporates such multiple identities and personalities in her writing, which is very refreshing. And that is a trend that is very common to a lot of speculative writing. So you have like a movement of a fluidity of so many things that you will see in this story. So yeah, if anyone has any like doubts or questions, I think you can ask at the end of the session, but if you do want to stop me, please do go ahead and feel free. um, so The Salt Roads is a novel written in 2003, so it is quite a while since it came out. But it has a very fluid genre, and I really like the way in which the story sort of came across. So it's a combination of historical fiction, so it has a lot of real characters woven into the narrative, but it also has an element of magic realism. There's a lot of what do you say, like I was saying, folk elements and folk themes that are woven into the story itself, but it is also sort of fits within the genre of fantasy fiction, because it does have something that goes slightly beyond magical realism. So as a genre itself, the Salt Roads cannot be pinned down, even though I suppose this is essentially what is sort of spoken about in the market. It is also, of course, it's also a novel that deals with a lot of issues related to the LGBTQIA movement, and so in that sense is also a gender, like a novel that deals with issues revolving around gender. Okay, so what is the story about? Um, so the Salt Roads are basically the roads within quotes, that travel between Africa and the colonizer countries that African slaves were taken to. And the sort of the mapping of that, moving from the slaves and slave trade into people who who are of African or African descent, or people of black people from various other countries as well. Okay, so the Salt Roads then is basically about that travel between Africa and colonizer countries. In this case, it's Saint Domingue, or what is now Haiti. And you have, at least that's one of the stories that's there in the novel. So the Salt Roads deals with three stories of Mer, Jean de Waal, and Thais, or Meritet, who, yeah. So these three characters who are connected by a deity called Erzuli Laziren, or more popularly known as Mamiwata. Erzuli and Mamiwata are slightly different, but they revolve around the same traditions. So you will see that there are a lot of parallels between the two deities. Okay, deities, or you can call them spirits. They're more like spirits that of African various tribal traditions, mostly of the Yoruba tradition. So these three stories of Mer, Jean de Waal, and Thais are woven through with the story of Laziren, or more popularly known as Mamiwata. Now, Mer is situated in the 1750s, Jean de Waal in the 1850s, and Thais much earlier in the early 300, mid 300 AD. And Laziren, of course, as a spirit, travels in time between time and space between these three people. Again, you have Saint Domingue, Haiti, the Caribbean. You have Jean de Waal in France, and you have Thais in Egypt. Forgive my pronunciations if they're wrong. So who is Laziren, or who is Mamiwata? So if you look at the image over here, that is one of the many depictions of Mamiwata. Now, some people say that Mamiwata is a pigeon term used for mother of water, though some people do say that it has an earlier origin. But Laziren is a deity or a spirit of the West African Vodun, the Haitian Vodun, or the Yoruba tradition. So there is a connection with West Africa and Haiti, and more prominently in the Yoruba tribal tradition. Now, the spirit is usually female, though it's said that Mamiwata can take on a personification of men as well, or any gender for that matter, though usually female as a spirit. And they basically, the spirit is appears in front of people as a mermaid, or yeah, half serpent or fish and half woman, and the torso of the woman is usually naked. And while we do have our own sort of Victorian norms associated with representations in these cases, Mamiwata's representation is also direct reference to her sexuality, and a representation of that sort of fertility of of women. But at the same time, so Mamiwata has multiple things associated with her. One is the mirror, and the mirror, very interestingly, allows her to move through time and space, and this is a very key element that Nalo Hopkinson uses in the Salt Roads. So Mamiwata then travels between the 1750s in Haiti, what was Saint Domingue, to France, to Egypt. So she travels back and forth in time and in space. And she is a representation of Mamiwata is the snake, which shows divination. So the characters do have an element of seeing the future. So for example, Jean Duval actually sees what happens at the end of the story. She sees right at the beginning of the story. Okay, and so also Mer sees a little bit of the lives of the people in the Caribbean in the water. Okay, so there is an element of divination that's associated with Mamiwata, which is here used along also with the people who she possesses, who are possessed by her. And that is the other characteristic of Laziren, which is the element of dance, trance, and possession. We do know the kind of beauty that various Black communities have with their dance traditions, and that is something that comes through in some of the trances that happen with in the Caribbean, with all the various slaves who go out into the forest and sort of dance to call upon the spirits to help them overcome the colonizer. And that's a very interesting perspective. The next is, of course, the depiction of female sexuality. An interesting element of Mamiwata is that she supposedly lures men and tests them, but not necessarily men, also women. She tests them, and if they fall for her, she then sort of gives them, she then allows them to be, or allows their fidelity to their partners, which is a very interesting sort of African tradition. The other thing that we see in the story is the element of healing, which is also attributed to Laziren. And Mer is a healer, and there are elements of healing that you will see even in Thais or Jean Duval as well. And those who are possessed by Mamiwata are considered seers, mystics, prophets, and so on. Okay. The other sort of element to Mamiwata is Erzuli, and I'm not going into this, but basically Erzuli has a much more frivolous element to her. So she is a compassionate spirit, but she has a jealous, spoiled, lazy side, flirtatious side to her. Okay, where she seduces people without distinguishing between them, but she's never able to attain her heart's most fervent desire. So Erzuli is more the spirit that Jean Duval sees, while Laziren is the one that Mer and Meritet see. Okay, though of course they're both sort of conflated into the same spirit. Okay, now in the case of Mer's story, you see that it's basically situated in the Caribbean, and she has a relationship with her helper who is called Tipingi. And Tipingi, interestingly, is actually married to a man named Patrice, but Patrice runs away from the sugar plantations where they're working as slaves, and Mer and Tipingi are healers there. So you see a very normal, beautiful relationship between Mer and Tipingi, also flavored with a lot of hurt, because Mer is she knows that Tipingi has a relationship with Patrice, but at the same time, it hurts her when she sees the two of them together, while they show a very interesting relationship between the three of them. Now, the other very interesting character in the story is Makandal, who is actually based on a real person who was a one-armed slave during the 1750s in Saint Domingue. And basically, he was somebody who helped organize maroon bands. Okay, so the maroons were people who ran away from the sugarcane plantations into the wild, and they set up homes over there in order to rebel against the colonizers who were French over there. Yeah, so, and one of the things that he did, which is used in the story, is to poison the drinking water of the French, but he was his plot was sort of found out. He was captured and burned alive. And this is yes, sir.
2 more minutes for you. Is it okay?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Fine. So this is the story of Mer. So I'm not going to go into the history of Saint Domingue, though it plays a huge role in shaping the story of Mer and her people. The second character, as I was saying, second story that we have here is that of Jean Duval. And she was an actress, a Haitian actress and dancer of mixed French and Black ancestry. And she was a mistress to Charles Baudelaire, and that's how she was more popularly known. She was known as Black Venus, or Mistress of Mistresses, a name coined to her by Charles Baudelaire. And you see her story of trials and tribulations seen throughout the, her time in France, affected by Charles Baudelaire's very, what was then termed as the bohemian attitude that he had. And she died in 1862. The third story, also very interesting, is that of Thais or Meritet, which is the backstory to a person who is actually spoken about in Christian theology, the Saint Mary of Egypt, who was a prostitute, a sex worker, and she moved to Jerusalem. So first, at the age of 12, she goes to Alexandria. She becomes a sex worker there. She then goes to Jerusalem. And the story there is of how she ends up becoming a priest, who's a believer of Christ. But in the story that Nalo Hopkinson weaves, it shows an appropriation of how a woman from Egypt ends up in Jerusalem and ends up being sort of perceived and portrayed as a saint in the Christian tradition, even though she had her own faith and belief in Laziren or Erzuli. So the way in which they show an appropriation of religion is also very interesting. So this is basically how the story is broken into. These are the chapters, and you see that this is a chant to the deity Laziren, but it is also a call of, it reads like a poem, it reads like a chant, where you're looking at strength, you're looking at being broken down and then being shaped up. And that is what Laziren tells Mer as well, that people seem to be forgetting me, my, their origins in our traditions and our sort of, spirits and faith. But so the story weaves these narratives together in order to show a survival through colonization, through racism, through sexism, and in that sense tries to break all these barriers. So this was the reason I really loved reading The Salt Roads. If you get a chance, please do read it. I think it's available on Kindle, and it's a really lovely read. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Saija Shankar, for that enlightening review for us. If there are any questions, you can unmute yourself, introduce yourself, and ask your questions for Professor Saija. So, Professor Saija, I have a question for you.
Yes, sir.
Who was your favorite character in the novel? Like, which character appeals to you a lot?
It was very difficult to pick because each time I was reading one section, I started getting excited about that character. But I think one of the people I really empathized with was Mer, because she had a very soft yet, strong attitude towards the life that she was living. So I really liked her character. I also liked how Laziren was portrayed, because usually when you talk about gods or deities or spirits, there's a tendency to depict them as all-knowing, as grand, as great. But Laziren was sort of like a child spirit, you know, she was a person who was trying to find herself in her own way. So that itself was very interesting. And I think these two really resonated with me.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Saija. Any other
Thank you,
questions or comments or suggestions for Professor Saija? You can unmute yourself, introduce yourself. Yes.
Good evening, ma'am. I'm Beulah from Madurai.
Yeah.
Very interesting book. Something which is very new. You talked about one-armed one-armed slave.
Just I can't hear you clearly. Could you repeat yourself, ma'am?
Hello.
Yeah.
I'm audible.
Yeah.
A bit feeble. Yeah, you raise your voice.
The book was very interesting.
Yeah.
You talked about one-armed slave. Something which is very new to me. It's a new term, one-armed slave. Could you please explain that? What is that one-armed slave? While we were talking about the Mackenzie.
Yeah, I mean, nothing in particular. So he was supposed to be physically impaired. So he had only one arm, and he was a slave brought in from Africa. Now, you'll see that, he has his own traditions and beliefs, but has a certain element of, spirituality attributed to him in this story. So that's an interesting element. But I mean, he's basically, it shows, it's based on reality that he didn't have an arm. But what Nalo Hopkinson does is to use that to also show, she brings in disability in a very normal manner. Like, you won't see Makandal as a person with disability, though that's what we will attribute as a terminology to, somebody who doesn't have an arm or a leg today. He's somebody who's very self-assured, he's very confident, and that was true historically as well. So he's basically somebody who lost his arm, but she uses his character to bring out how people sought for, war against the colonizer.
Okay, thank you. Something which is very new to me. Like our Naga Mandala, there is something different story, but here it's entirely different. The characters, all these. Okay, thank you so much for the sharing.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am.
Good evening, everyone. Christina here.
Yeah. Hello,
Rukta, with
Christina.
your permission, can I ask a question? Hey, Sayu.
Yeah.
Just wanted to ask you about the spirit of Mamiwata. Like you were talking something about the seduction scenes, right? And it's quite quirky the way in which the different sexualities and the idea of seduction itself is like moving into the narrative. Could you just like explain that point? Like I'm giving you some more space to, probably talk about it.
So in terms of sexuality, one of the things that you'll see in all three characters, which is, I mean, you could say sort of feeds off of the strength of Laziren, is they're very, what do you say, like their sexuality is not, hindered or submissive or something. It is a very, open and clear sort of portrayal of desire and affection, both. Right, so it's both love and desire. You'll see both. Like for Mehr, she really loves Tipingi, and you'll see that they have a relationship that's very sweet. Like Tipingi braids Mehr's hair. Of course, they also make love. But then Tipingi has a husband, and when her husband comes, she sort of at least slightly ignores Mehr, and it's a very normal relationship, which is, so when you talk about Laziren allows you, or Erzuli allows you that space to look at, within quotes, different relationships, right? And see them as very normal and day-to-day. And I think that's a very interesting usage of an African tradition in contemporary narratives, to show that basically all sexualities, all genders are, normal. Like there's a usual assumption that there's only man, woman, and everything else is a spectrum in between. But you see this as a very normal thing. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you
for those wonderful questions. Yes, thank you, Professor Saija, for that enlightening session with us all. Thank you so much. Right. Now we have Professor Sangamitra, Ms. Sangamitra, second in English, who will be doing a review of Becky Chambers' The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. Over to you, Ms. Sangamitra.
Thank you, sir. Am I audible? Hello?
Yes, you are.
Yes, sir.
Yes, you are audible, Ms. Sangamitra.
Yes, so today I'd like to talk about The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. And this is a work of science fiction, as you can see by its name. So the reason why I chose to talk about this book is I'm primarily a fantasy reader, but this is my first, this is the first book of science fiction that I've ever read. And this book is the reason why I'm in love with science fiction right now. And I believe this is something we have to talk about, because usually there is a tendency to measure up all other kinds of genre fiction against literary fiction. And usually it's, usually genre fiction is seen as something lesser, something inferior to literary fiction, because there are two reasons given. One is it's meant for children, and second is that it doesn't have enough of literary value like literary fiction has. And I do not believe that is true. So yeah, this is why I would like to review this book to prove that assumption false. So first I'd like to start talking about the setting of this book. This book takes place a few years into the future, where the Earth has died and a few humans have started a colony on Mars, and the rest had to flee. They're called as the Exodants, and the ones on Mars are called the Solans, because they chose to remain within the solar system. And in this time, a human called Rosemary Harper, who used to be a Martian. Her father was jailed for treason, and so she was forced to leave Mars, and she joins a ship that is called the Wayfarer. So that ship is a tunneling ship. They create tunnels in space. That is, they literally bore a hole through space and they connect one point to another, creating a wormhole. So it's concepts like these that make everybody believe, okay, it's just for people who like science, which is not true at all, because most of the science here is purely the imagination of the author. It all comes down to world building. So there's another thing which makes people think that science fiction is not relatable, and that is aliens. So the question they ask is, how can a human being relate to an alien? But in fact, if you actually look at it, aliens are devices that writers use to portray points of view that may not be very accepted. I think so. Yeah, it also provides you with an alternate worldview. Each of these aliens have cultures of their own. So I believe that this makes you a bit more flexible in your mind. So yeah, there are a lot of aliens on board, about 3 or 4 of them, and 3 or 4 humans who live together on that spaceship. And they're offered a contract to go to a planet that is light years away and construct a tunnel. This is their first long haul. So this is practically the first time that people are spending months aboard instead of docking on a planet. They'll spend this entire year traveling to that planet to construct a tunnel in between. I felt this part especially was very interesting because it is just like the times we live in now. They can't go out anywhere. They're forced to live in close quarters with the people they work with. And they have to learn to adjust to other people's routines. And you just cannot get out of that place. So for me, that sounds a lot like quarantine. And for many people who are very extroverted or used to going out a lot, I think they would go mad under those conditions, which is what happens to them as well. And there are a lot of other issues also I'm sorry, am I audible now? Hello?
Yes, Sangamitra, you are audible. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so there are a lot of other issues also discussed using this. There are different races of aliens. There are different standards, and there are different rules that you have to abide by. And every culture respects the other because it's a very fragile balance in the universe. All these species, they have cultural clashes, but then there is a galactic council that keeps everything in check. And it is so fragile that even 1 or 2 transgressions may cause interplanetary war at any time. So this is the setting in which they are. And I would, yeah. As for flexibility of thinking and different cultures, like a few points I wanted to make were, there is a species called an andrisk, which is a very social species, and they live together in families. So the concept of family itself is different over there, because over the course of their lives, they have 3 families. One is a hatch family, that is the family where the eggs are given and where hatchlings grow up. Then there's a feather family, that's the family you choose for yourself. That when your feathers start growing, that's when you leave your hatch family and you go in search of new friends, of lovers, of people to call your own. And after a while, after you get very old, you're very experienced, that's when you have a house family. So other andrisks come and leave their eggs with you. And there is an andrisk who speaks about this. She says she does not understand why for humans a child is more precious than a full-grown adult, because she says that she does not understand why the potential of having a life is more important than the experience and the knowledge you've accumulated as an adult. Another thing is there is also representation of the LGBTQ community, as Sayoja ma'am said, and I think that it is much easier for people to accept that to accept LGBTQ representation in the form of aliens, because aliens are seen as the other. So I don't agree with this, but yeah, that is, I don't know, I think it's a form of representation. I'm not sure if I'm very clear here. Yeah. So basically, I'd like to end with a reading. Yeah, here. This is by a species called the grum. The grum is a species that is born male, and in the middle of its life, it is female, and at the end of its life, it dies as a species that is neither male or female. And this is a species that has come very close to extinction. So there's one that talks to a human, and it says, "Our species are very different from one another. You have 2 hands, I have 6. You sleep in a bed, I sleep in a tub. You like mech, I don't. Many little differences. But there's one thing that Grum and humans have in common, and that is our capacity for cruelty. Which is not to say we're very bad at the core. I think both of our species have good intentions, but when left to our passions, we have it within ourselves to do despicable things. The only reason humans stopped killing each other to the extent you used to, I think, is because your planet died before you could finish the job. My species was not so lucky. The reason you haven't seen any other Grum is because there are only some 300 of us left." Rosemary's hand went to her mouth. "I'm sorry," she said. Such a quintessentially human thing to express sorrow through apology. Dr. Sheff said, "It was our own doing. Our extinction wasn't caused by a natural disaster or the slow crawl of evolution. We killed ourselves." He thought aloud for a moment, sorting out all the pieces. "For generations, my species was at war with itself. I couldn't even tell you why. Oh, there are historians with all sorts of theories and ideas, but it's the same story you hear everywhere. Different beliefs, different cultures, territories everyone wanted. I was born into that war. And when I was ready, I took my place in it as a doctor. I wasn't the sort of doctor I was now. I didn't become friends with my patients. My job was to patch up dying soldiers as fast as I could so that they could get back out there and keep killing. The truth is, Rosemary, that you are capable of anything, good or bad. You always have been and you always will be. Given the right push, you too could do horrible things. The darkness exists within all of us. All you can do, Rosemary, all any of us can do is work to be something, make every day of their life. The universe is what we make of it. It is up to you to decide what part you will play. And it's things like these which makes science fiction so relatable, because they talk about war, about death, about things that could actually happen if we aren't careful enough of our decisions, and if we don't think about people we coexist with. So thank you. I hope it was an okay presentation.
Thank you. It was a wonderful presentation, Ms. Sanghamitra. It was an engaging presentation also. And if there are any questions for Ms. Sanghamitra Nataraj, you can unmute yourself, introduce yourself, and ask your questions. Sanghamitra, I have a question for you.
Yes, sir.
Rosemary is supposed to be chaotic, right? A character who celebrates, chaos, and she's known for being crazy.
Yes, sir.
Do you like her for that? That wonderful spirit that she has. What makes her, engaging?
I like her very much, so because she was a strong person. So basically, she came from a background that was very soft and luxurious, and she had everything she could possibly want, because she was born on Mars, which is where the richest of the rich population left. They left everybody else and went. So after having such a good life, she underwent a huge struggle when her father was jailed for treason. And after that, she had to hide her identity and make a living for herself on a ship in the middle of space when she was used to solid ground. So she was thrown into a situation that was entirely alien, and she managed to make the best of it. And she never gave up even once, even when this spaceship was raided by pirates. That was when she was very new to work, and she still handled the whole situation diplomatically, and was because of her that everybody else survived. So I think I like that about her, because she has a fighting spirit.
That's great. That's a wonderful answer. So motivating also, that fighting spirit, thank you, Ms. Sangamitra. And I also came to know that this book was self-published by Becky Chambers to begin with. She self-published it through a Kickstarter campaign, through crowdfunding, because, the Kickstarter campaign helps people to publish their own books, celebrate creativity and self-publishing, how self-publishing helped her to find a place for herself in the world of books and reading. Thank you, Ms. Sangamitra. If there are any other questions, you can unmute yourself and quickly ask a question. That was a wonderful presentation, Ms. Sangamitra. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Rufus, sir, I just have a small comment.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. So, Sangu, thank you so much for that wonderful review. Sangamitra is quite the pride of our department. Like, she is a published author as well. So I want her to just quickly mention some of her works and what inspired her to become a writer, because she sort of can empathize much more into the writer's process when she begins writing. And she's somebody who dabbles with so many different fields, from speculative to haikus to all kinds of things. So Sangu, if you could just very briefly tell us about the joy of being a writer and also the struggles of being one.
Wow, that's a wonderful question, Professor Christina. Yes, Sangamitra, please, it could be a great motivation for all the other budding writers also on the group, right? Yes.
That's a really good question, ma'am. So I think I started writing for 7 because we had a story competition in school, and I found that I enjoyed it very much. And I began reading at the age of, I think, 2, very early in life. So I'm a voracious reader and I just love books. So there came a point where I found that the stories I wanted to read weren't anymore. So I thought, okay, if nobody else is going to write that, then I'm going to do it. So yeah, that's what I thought. Like, I would write something. And that was back in 2014 when I came up with my first novel idea. But then, yeah, I didn't get around to writing it until 2019, I think, because I started, I don't know, I wrote like half a chapter and it would never come out right. So, and then I decided, okay, this is not happening. I am going to write it. And I think that determination is very necessary, because it takes a long time to write a novel. The first one took 8 months. It's unpublished, but it took 8 months to complete. And in between, I stopped writing for a week, and then I'd write a chapter every day, and then I just stopped for an entire month. I think it takes a lot of motivation and determination to actually finish. It's very easy to start a novel, but yeah, you need to have endurance. I think a writer once said that marathon runners and writers have very much in common, because you need to see the end point. You need to finish the race at the end of it. So yeah, coming to my published works, I have 2 volumes of haiku. The first one I wrote in college, in UG, because I was sitting for a poetry class and our professor was talking about haikus, and I found that they just came very easily. So I went back home and I wrote them, and then I decided to publish it as a collection. The second one happened the next year. DC ma'am was having a poetry session, a workshop. She asked me to conduct a haiku workshop for Poetry X. And that was in while helping everybody in the workshop come up with their haikus. I found that I had, a lot of them coming, and within 2 days, I wrote around 75 of them and then just published it as a second collection. So after that, my published works are, I have 4 short stories. Miss Lakshmi Priya, she helped me publish them because she told me about competitions that came up with the Kyoto Press. And as a result of the 4th story, they offered me a novella publishing deal. And it's a fantasy novella which will come out in October. So this is my published work so far. Unpublished, I have a few manuscripts and I'm currently querying them with publishers. So yeah, that's about it.
Thank you.
That
Thank you
was
so much,
wonderful.
Raghu.
Thank you, Professor DC, for that wonderful question, and it made us, engage better with Ms. Sangamitra, the writer also, right? Not only the reader, but also the writer. Thank you so much. And Ms. Sangamitra Nataraj, we wish you the best, right? Blessings, prayers, and wishes for you in everything that you do, right? If there are no other questions, we'll move on to our next delegate of the day. Thank you, Ms. Sangamitra Nataraj. Thank you so much. Yes. Mr. Avichi Krishnan, Professor Avichi Krishnan is a film enthusiast also. So he's here to present a movie as a text with reference to Kim Ki-duk, that wonderful, amazing South Korean filmmaker, from his movie with reference to his movie. It's a kind of a documentary movie. Over to you, Professor Avichi Krishnan.
Good evening. Am I audible?
Clear, sir.
Clear. Okay.
Yes.
So, can I share the screen? Okay.
Yes, sir. Just a minute.
Yeah, please. Okay. Hope it's visible, no?
Yes, sir. It's visible. Clear.
Right. Okay. Good evening, all of you. I'm so happy to meet you all in one place, because nowadays nobody is ready to visit, right? Many of us are hesitant to visit anyone, right? Okay. So I'm so happy to meet you all. In fact, I'm with the idea of giving a coffee or a tea and then good snacks from my house, right? But please consider this as my offer, right? Okay. Let's meet a little later, right? Now I'm going to give you a feast of Kim Ki-duk's films, right? The title that I choose is Kim Ki-duk's Arirang. What I mean to say by this, right? Okay. I found a way to conduct my classes. The way is, normally I used to pick 2 or 3 of my students, right? And then as if all of the students are, all of you are surrounding with me. This is how I used to imagine, and I used to mention their names as if they're surrounding me, as if they're conversating with me, right? So before starting the session, I forgot to give 2 excuses. Excuse number 1, my English may be horrible, right? Because I'm an accountant, professional accountant, right? That's one. The other one, I'm not going to introduce any specific book, or I'm not going to focus on one book. I'm going to speak about the entire Kim Ki-duk's works, okay, right? So this is how you need to adjust or you need to bear, right? Okay. Now let's come to the original agenda. Let us now imagine my beloved sister, Professor JP, is all the way from Kodaikanal, and she reached my home, right? Okay. So I offered a stool for her, right? JP, I think the stool is not enough for you. So let me offer a big sofa for you, wherein you could adjust and sit, right? Okay. And then let me invite one more friend of mine, very good friend of mine, RBI, AGM and RBI, Kavita, right? Okay. So now the conversation is between me, Kavita and JP, right? So they are going to raise questions. I'm going to answer them as if I'm a professor in the literal classroom. This is the setup, right? So the conversation is going to happen now. let me enjoy along with you, right? Okay. So now the question from JP, right? Who is Kim Ki-tuk, right? Who is Kim Ki-tuk, right? My answer to JP, many Indians used to pronounce his name as Kim Ki-tuk, right? That may not be right. Kim Ki-tuk is the right pronunciation. Let it be Tuk or Tak here, right? His works are the most important thing, right? Okay. Now the question from Kavita, right? Could you please give some information about Kim Ki-tuk, right? My answer or the information which I plan to share is Kim Ki-tuk is born in a mountainous village, which is named as Bongwa in South Korea, right? The second point is the important thing. He is a junior high school dropout, right? Okay. So normally I used to raise this question in front of all the teaching fraternity, right? The famous Cuban movie, Carmela teacher raised a question to teachers like us. Did we understood the meaning of education, right? Why? Because I saw many junior dropouts, junior school dropout or high school dropouts in the topmost position are familiar, known to people, right? Okay, I'm just asking this question to me. Did I understood the meaning of education? So with that question, right, what Kim Ki-tuk does, right? Okay, he studied fine arts in Paris, and then for livelihood, he sold his paintings on street. So this is how he is not born with silver spoon, right? Okay, he is now aged about 59. His date of birth is 20th December 1960. He is a self-taught filmmaker. He never undergo any courses from any of the famous institutes, right? Okay, so that's why many of his scenes are the fantastic, and he never admitted any cliches, right? Okay, his films are totally different, less of cliches, right? A few more things about Kim Ki-tuk, right? The important information or interesting information about Kim Ki-tuk is two reviews, two fantastic film critics gave this reviews. The first review is rarely break even in the domestic office, right? He never a successful director in his own country, right? Okay, or his own hometown, right? He is not a successful person. Then he is more popular in New York than Seoul. Is it true? Let me share my personal experience. Last year, when the International Film Society screened his film The Net, okay, they avoid to screen the film on Saturday and Sunday, right? They chose Monday between 2:30 to 5:30, right? The organizers are on the idea that if we select Monday, right, more people will not come, the crowd will be less. This is how they planned. But unfortunately, the schedule was at 2 o'clock. But by 1:20 or 1:25, you won't even believe the entire Devi Theatre that has 650 seats. All the seats were filled. Many of the cinema people, right? Many of the cinema VIPs, they didn't get seat. So this is how Kim Ki-tuk is more popular even in India than Seoul. Right? Then many of his films are directly or indirectly autobiographical. Right? He served in the military, so he took Coast Guard. Right? He was worked in a small monastery, so he took 4 seasons. So this is how many of his movies are connected with his life, right? So when I started speaking about Kim Ki-tuk, obviously many of our participants are expecting the controversies, right? Okay, so I'm here to express all the controversies about Kim Ki-tuk. He is somehow cruel. Misogyny was as a part of his movie, right? Many of his women characters are prostitutes. Sexual abuse by the actress against him. So there are so many things, right? In short, Kim Ki-tuk's movies will streak you, scoom you, and bolt from viewing chair. Let me share my personal experience, right? when I was part of the team where the movie is cut screened, right? Okay. Many of the participants, nearly 100 plus, many of the delegates, they were forced to come out of the hall by 20 minutes. Okay. But if few or countable was there in the hall till it completes. When I come out of the hall, everyone gave a strange look at me. Even today morning, when I discussed this topic with one of my close friend, director Sinu Ramasamy, he immediately denied. Why you choose Kim Ki-duk? I think you're psychologically you're not okay, right? You have some issues. Please check with your psychiatrist. This is how many people are reluctant to turn their face to Kim Ki-duk. Right now, Kavita's question now. Krishnan, I think you started with the topic Kim Ki-duk's Arirang, no? Could you please tell what is Arirang? Kavita, the answer is very interesting. Arirang is a documentary directed by Kim Ki-duk. This is point number one. Point number two, why Kim Ki-duk chose this name? What makes him to choose this name, right? That is a question, right? The answer is very, very interesting. It's a Korean folk song. Arirang is the title of the Korean folk song, which is an unofficial national anthem of Korea, right? Many Koreans used to sing this in different ways. They are singing this for more than 600 years. So almost it's like the ancient literature or Sangam literature, right? There are 3,600 variations and 60 different versions of this one single song. So you can imagine the importance of this song in Korea. Then it's very popular when Korea was under Japanese control, right? Another common thing. I think this is the one song is shared commonly by North as well as South Korea, because whatever you did in South Korea, or if you try to get into North Korea, you will be in trouble, right? You will be in soup. So, but this one is accepted by both North Korea and South Korea. Then, when I discussed this with Professor JP, she guided me. Krishnan, I think this is a kind of melancholy, right? Why? Another important information is one professor, Mr. Kim Yoon Gap, right? He wrote a book on this Arirang, culture of Arirang. This is how the Arirang is an important thing in Korea. Right now, Sai Sri is raising a question. Krishnan, why don't you put that song, or why don't you show the poem on the screen, right? Sai, let me accept, right? Okay, I think you're curious to know this. Let me accept. This is a song, right, which is in Korean, the left side, right side, the English translation is there. Okay, right? It's rendered by a girl, right, when she departed from the boy, right? So the fourth line is the important line. Your feet will be sore before you go 10 ri. What is it? RI or ri? Ri is a Korean unit of distance. It's approximately about 10 kilometers. So when you calculate this perfectly, 10 into 10, 100 kilometers. Okay. So now there is a question. Why the boy is going 100 kilometers on a hilly path? Right? Okay. What exactly the name of the mountain? Bekadu is the mountain name. When he reached the top of the mountain, there is a lake called Heaven Lake, right? The lake is formed. In between the volcano eruptions. So when you reach there, you can enjoy the lake. What is there? Why the lake is so special? Why? Because even in the middle of the winter days, the flowers will bloom, right? Okay. This is how the mountain. The mountain is the highest mountain in South Korea, right? Okay. So on top of the mountain, there is a lake, Heaven Lake. So the boy is ready to travel, or ready to take the burden of traveling 100 kilometers to reach the mountain and to reach the Heaven Lake, right? So in short, it describes the difficulties experienced by the protagonist while going over the mountain pass. Now, let me answer Kavita's question. Why I chose this topic? Kim Ki-duk traveled nearly so many kilometers, right? Okay, so many miles to reach the hearts of people like me, right? Okay, so when he reaches, no, he will feel, or we will feel we reach the heaven lake, right? Okay, so now we are into the heaven lake. Now the question is, what about the career and the accolades Kim Ki-duk got? Right? He wrote and directed nearly 20. He wrote nearly 30 plus stories. He directed nearly 23 movies and 2 documentaries. So put together 23 plus 2, 25. He edited 15 movies. He was worked as a cinematographer for 5 movies. He in fact produced 20 movies. At last, he acted in 2 movies. The 4th season, he acted as an adult mom. Then, Aman, he acted as masked man. Then, so many medals, right? So many awards, right? I just put 2, 3, right? I think if you count all his achievements, no, it may be 50 plus, right? I gave you the site. If you double click on that, you can reach and check right from A to Z. He got so many awards, right? At the same time, please understand, many of the countries, I think nearly 5 plus European Union, they are not ready to put Kim Ki-duk movie in their country. US, some of the movies are barred. So this is how Kim Ki-duk is a blend of both, right? Okay. Then let me introduce some of his books, right? The Kim Ki-duk written by Adrian, right? Okay. Then Kim Ki-duk on movies, the visual language by Marta. Then Kim Ki-duk, the contemporary film directors, is a series of books, right? In which Hye Sang-sung, right? He wrote a book on Kim Ki-duk. The another one by Hyun Jung Min, Kim Ki-duk and the cinema sensations. Among all, the 4th one is the important book. I'm going to explain this book. I'm going to focus on this book down the line. To my surprise, even I found 2 books in Tamil. The first book is the beautiful book, right? Okay, the awesome work by Jamalan. Jamalan, for your information, he wrote 2 books on cinema, Tamil cinema, right? One is Kim Ki-duk Cinematic Udal. The another one is Dalit cinema, right? Okay, so Jamalan is a rare kind of film critic. Okay, so then Kadal Kamam Krodam by Kuhan. Another book, all my Malayalam friends appreciated this book, right? In fact, I got this information from one of my Malayalam friend. He's in Trivandrum, right? Okay, he told me this book is a good book, right? With his help, I read the topic, right? Kim Ki-duk Cinemayum Jeevidam, right? I hope it's correct, right? Kim Ki-duk Cinemayum Jeevidam, right? Now let's focus on cinema of sensations, right? This is a book. Now, Professor JP is asking this question. Krishnan, you've listed so many books, no? Why you focus on this? In what way this book is different from others? My answer to JP, in fact, it's not a book. It's a PhD dissertation by Professor Hyun Jung Min. He submitted this in 2008 to University of Maryland, USA, right? Okay. Then, as a research paper, he used Gilles Deleuze ideas, right? Who's Deleuze? French philosopher, right? What are the books written by Deleuze? Lot. Okay. Let me give a list of some books on cinema and philosophy. Cinema, the movement image. Cinema, the time image. These 3 are the most important books authored by Deleuze. Right. What is the description given by Deleuze about cinema? Cinema is a pre-verbal intelligible content, right? Please don't confuse it with Indian cinemas or Tamil cinemas, because most of the Tamil cinemas are Indian cinemas are talkies. I could remember those days, right? When we when we are on a pilgrimage to Palani, no? AP Nagarajan's lot of movies. They used to put this in the cone speaker, right? Okay, we used to visualize all the film, right? As if Murugan came to us and blessed us, right? Okay, this is how we enjoyed cinema through radio. I think it's a injustice to cinema, right? If you can understand the entire cinema through radio, right? Okay, or through audio, right? It's not at all a visual medium, yeah. It's not at all a visual medium, right? Okay, so it's a pre-verbal. The verbal or the dialogues may be bit, right, or limited, but the content must be intelligible even without any dialogues. So this is what the description given by Deleuze, right? Okay, in the light of Deleuze, he took 3 movies of Kim Ki-duk, Crocodile, The Isle, Four Seasons. Four Seasons is a another, it's otherwise known as Four Seasons. The original title is Spring, Summer, Fall, Winter, and Spring. Nothing but Punarapi Jananam, Punarapi Maranam, right? The life will come again. Reincarnation will be there, right? Okay, this is what Kim Ki-duk is meant to by this movie, right? In fact, if you want to know what is Buddhism, or if you want to learn, or if you're interested in Buddhism, I think this is the right movie you have to watch, right? Then he compared 3 like-natured Hollywood movies in this book, right? I read almost all the books about Kim Ki-duk, but I found Kim Ki-duk's Cinematic Udalgal by Jamalan in Tamil, and then Kim Ki-duk's Cinema of Sensations in English. I think these 2 books are worth it, right? Now, let me do a favor. At the end of the session, PDF format, because I think it's out of Professor Rufus, am I audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You're clear.
All right. Okay. Okay. So okay, this book is out. I think it's out of print. So let me share this in PDF format. So please share with your friends. Right now, again, the next question is this from. Okay, let me thank all these people, right? Especially Professor Jaypriya, Mother Teresa University. She's my beloved sister, right? Then Professor Rufus. I think I need to appreciate Professor Rufus for running this forum, right? Okay, and then there are so many other things. Now there is an now let me use 2-3 minutes of yours. Professor Rufus, can I take 4-5 minutes of them?
Yes, sir. Sure. Yes, sir.
Okay, right.
Yes.
Now we reach the interesting part, right? We reach the interesting part. The interesting part is I'm going to show you 2 movies, right? Don't worry, I'm not going to put the entire movie. I'm going to show you the selected scenes, right? Okay, and then I'm going to explain you how it is pre-verbal and how the content is highly intelligible, right? Okay, so I took 2 movies. The first movie is The Bow, right? Okay. One minute, let it get started. Okay, now the question is, why he chose this topic, right? Or right? Let me answer this question. This is the answer, right? Okay. So the darkness of Boo, right? it could be used as strength or beautiful sound. So that's why he chose this. This is how Kim Ki-duk's movies are highly dictioned one. I think normal viewers cannot understand it so easily. That's why it is more or less a prophet who carries normally so many information, so many messages through this movie, right? Art and fans like me could find it so easily, right? But many viewers will not agree with me, right? They think it in a different way, right? People like Seenu Ramasamy will not agree with me, right? With this, I think it's high time to stop my lecture. Okay, I'm so sorry, Dr. Rufus. I took so much of time.
That's okay, sir. Thank you. Thank you, sir, for that engaging, rewarding session. It was like listening to a professor of English giving us a lecture on movies as a text. We were all absorbed, glued and wooed from beginning till the end. And the way you narrated it, the way you described, Kim Ki-duk, I think tonight itself, you are going to watch Kim Ki-duk's movies, and we are now so passionate about Kim Ki-duk and South Korean movies also in particular. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, and I should thank particularly Dr. Jayapriya for introducing Mr. Avichi Krishnan, Professor Avichi Krishnan, to us all. And thank you, ma'am. And if there are any questions for Professor Avichi Krishnan, you can unmute yourself, introduce yourself, and ask a question. We can allow 2 questions for now, and towards the end, we can have the other questions. How do you account for the extreme use of violence in his movies? The violence in his movies, a lot of violence in his movies, extreme violence in his movies. What do you think about that?
Okay. When we met Kim Ki-duk at Trivandrum Film Festival, no, we asked the same question to Kim Ki-duk. We raised the same question, right? But Kim Ki-duk answered in a different way. Violence is a kind of it's a way of messaging, right? So that is why that is my way. That's what Kim Ki-duk's answer is, right? ஒருத்தர் வாந்தி எடுக்கிறாரு அப்படின்னா அவர் என்ன சொல்றாருன்னா அந்த மூவி பார்க்கும்போது வாந்தி எடுக்கிற ஃபீலிங் நடந்துடணும். This is how it's so extreme, right? Okay, I think you mean to say movies like Mobius and movies like Coast Guard, 3 Iron, all these movies, I think normal audience cannot watch it so easily, right? Okay, I think you mean to say all these movies, right? Even Samaritan Girl, when the girl jumping out of the house, right? Okay, or when she gave slap to a guy, the guy is nearly aged about her father, right? Okay, so she used to give slaps on all the guys who shared bed with her, right? Okay, this is how. But I accept that he's some extent is cruel, right? Some extent he used misogyny in his movies.
Thank you, sir. That was a question by Dr. Anjana from NSS College, Pandalam, Kerala. So she's the head of the department there. Yes, she asked that question. Thank you for that wonderful question, ma'am. And thank you for that lovely answer, sir. Any other questions for Mr. Avichi Krishnan?
Anna, this is JP here.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you for a wonderful presentation. I have had the privilege of listening to Krishnan Anna, like overnight we used to sit and we just, with a jazz drop down, we used to listen to him talking about movies. And this is completely different because this is the first time I'm listening to such a writer. And Anna, I have a question.
Yes.
You said that he has directed and he has also written, right?
Yeah.
And he's also a writer. And when he directed his movies, did you find a difference or is it the same, Anna?
Rough Cut is an example, right? Rough Cut, he wrote for his assistant. Rough Cut is the movie. I think the basic difference between the directed movies and written one, no, when he write stories, he used to write lots of dialogues. So that is the difference. When he used to direct, the dialogues maybe you can put all dialogues in one A4 sheet. That may be two in some movies. Movies like Mobius, right? When I give the CD to any one of my friend, they used to complain about no sounds even for 20 minutes. First 20 minutes, you cannot hear any sound. So this is the difference of the directed movie and written movie. This is the basic difference.
Okay. Okay, Anna, thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for that wonderful question. And thank you, sir, for that lovely answer. And if there are no more questions from Professor Avichi Krishnan, thank you so much, sir, for such an enthralling session, we should say. For the first time, we are discussing movies and that too, a South Korean film director with such passion. Right? Thank you so much, sir. Looking forward to having you more with us. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Now,
Thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you, sir. Now we move on to our next presenter, Miss Professor N. Sumadi. She'll be giving us her book review now. Over to you, Professor Sumadi.
Good evening, sir. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm here to review a book by Sandra Cisneros, The House on Mango Street. And this book has been prescribed in various universities, in schools and colleges in US as well as in India. Even in India, under Madras University, this book is a prescribed one under American literature. And Sandra Cisneros was born in Chicago. Let me start with the introduction to the writer and go on to the book review. And Sandra Cisneros was born in Chicago in 1954, and she was the recipient of several awards. And she has written two novels. One is The House on Mango Street and The Caramello. And when you come to short stories, she has written some short stories for children, Woman Hovering Creek, and other two books she has published under poetry collections are My Wicked Wicked Ways and Loose Woman. And she has written some children's book as well. And the language is so simple and everybody can read and understand, and that's why I've chosen this as my book review today. Otherwise, I have a lot of other inspiring books under different writers, say Khalil Gibran, and different genres, and as well as the writers. But this, I think this will be useful for our UG students as well as for our professors. So I chose this book today. And this author, when you look at, I'll show the book. I have the book now. This is a book actually, and this book has 110 pages, and the language is very simple. And if you want, you can contact the writer. Her website is sandracisneros.com. Okay, and she has called the chapters as vignettes. Okay, and this vignette is there are 44 vignettes, under which you find only a half a page of written text. Say one vignette starts towards the middle or towards the end of the page. The alignment is like that. I find the alignment is little different from the other novels. Whenever I reread all the other novels, I find that the page is full of text. But here this text is not so. One chapter or one vignette will have some 5 to 6 paragraphs maximum. 5 is more actually. She has even stopped with 1 or 2 paragraphs in some chapters. Okay, so when you read this novel, you come to know a lot of themes under which multiculturalism, okay, postmodernism, and how settlers struggle in different places, self-identity, the roots. Okay, and this actually traces a child, 12-year-old child Esperanza, who crosses different stages in 1 year from childhood to adolescence. Okay, and what are the things that she experiences under 1 year? that is captured in this novel. Even the novelist Sandra Cisneros starts with first person narration at the very beginning. She says that she has chosen a particular room, particular place for a writer. Okay, so apart from normal reading of the text, analyzing the feministic point of view and analyzing roots, self identity, multiculturalism, postmodernism, as a writer, what she feels about writing, what is about creative writing, that's what I have understood from this novel. Probably I'll read a few places, I'll read a few passages at the end of this presentation. I want to read few things that will make the novel more interesting for the readers and listeners to read further. Okay, so coming to each vignette, she talks about, first the dedication is given to the women. That's what is given. And this book was originally written in Spanish, and later it was translated over 20 more languages, and it has been bestseller. More than 6 million books have been sold online. And in Chennai, I couldn't find this book in any bookshop, but this is available in Amazon and other websites where you can buy this book. Okay, and coming to the novel part of Sandro Cisneros, you can find traces of multiculturalism, and you can find social class, racial discrimination, and sexuality, identity, and gender. All those things are interwoven throughout the novel. And as we know the genre, Bildungsroman, we know as professors as well as students of literature, we know that what is Bildungsroman. It analyzes a child's life from innocence to experience. Okay, so and this even this novel can be compared with the other novels for reading as Bildungsroman. A thesis can be done on this. Okay, and so and this she has faced, as a child she has faced lot of challenges in her life. And even choosing her career as a writer, the parents were against this child, that is even Sandra Cisneros. So I think a lot of autobiographical elements are there in this novel, because even the novel starts with the narration, I as a writer. That is how she starts. Okay, and so Esperanza, that's the main protagonist, a 12-year-old child. Okay, and how she undergoes a lot of changes in herself, both biologically, psychologically, and how her environment and society affects her in both positive as well as negative way. But towards the end, I feel that this Esperanza, the protagonist, stands different from the other characters which she witnesses in the novel. She is able to, and this book is actually dedicated to the women, and that makes it more interesting that women characters are more in number in this novel, and few men characters come, and those men characters are I'm sorry, are not presented in a good manner, or not portrayed in a good manner, because the 12-year-old child observes everything around her, what happens, right from sexual abuse done to her friend, and even the other men trying to approach women, all those things she come across. And you can see that whenever a man is portrayed in a negative sense. I don't know why Sandra Cisneros is particular or biased about this kind of view, and I am also against it, little against it. Okay, and so when you take this she talks about the boy and girl's relationship in adolescent age, how a child feels when she sees the opposite sex, how she feels and how they treat each other, how they treat each other, certain secretive things they talk among themselves, that is girls, and what do they talk, and what are the biological changes that she finds in her. And even if the child is not able to recognize the biological changes in her, uh, the people around her, especially the girls, the friends around her who studies with her in school, is able to make her that she should feel or she should realize that there are changes in her. Okay. And so she even starts with telling the significance of the name, where you deal with the roots. How do you find that the roots, the presence of roots are there, that is the ancestral roots. That is, she starts telling that she has just shifted from Loomis to Chicago, where she gets settled there. And from that you understand that she is very much bothered about roots, as well as she tells about her name. Why does she got this Esperanza as her name? Because of her great grandmother. Okay. And so she tells that she's very proud to have such kind of roots. Apart from that, she breaks the stereotypes later, and then she wants to go away from her home, away from Chicago, and she wants to live alone without looking out for any man, just to live on her own self, writing in a room separately, and enjoy creative writing. That is the main thing. The narration part is the story part, how it ends. And there are a lot of girls that she comes across, a lot of women who are subordinated by um, father as a very dominant characters. Fathers, especially two fathers are there who are very dominant characters, and who are against their daughters, not even ready to send them out home, or not even ready to send them out to talk with any boys, or to mingle with any of the friends. So they are just dominating these girls, try to even beat them, harass them, all those things. And how they stand out, how these women, I can't say that all the women in the novel or all the girls in the novel are really empowered. Some are empowered, some they exhibit in a wild manner. Like one lady who actually Rachel, who tries to actually beat her husband. Another one, Minerva, is there, who writes a lot of books, who writes poems, and who even beats her husband, saying that you are good for nothing, and sending him away, chasing him out of the home. Again, she will ask this man to come in just to beat him again. And so you understand that it is a hysteric or in a wild manner some women behaves, and they are trying to, I won't say that they are able to, but they are trying to dominate men characters. Those men characters, they are very submissive, they are not able to voice themselves. So totally I would say that in this novel all the men characters are muted. Only women characters, especially girls, stand out. And there are some few characters who tries to sexually abuse a girl child, especially even Esperanza has undergone a sexual abuse, like a man who tries to hug and kiss her during when she was working with that man. And even another girl, Sally, her friend, she was actually raped by raped by a boy in a monkey garden. The title of that vignette itself is Monkey Garden. The monkey garden shows that it's very symbolic. The monkey garden, monkey is referring to the boy. Okay, mischievous boy, and the garden referring to innocence. But the child loses her innocence and she goes towards the maturity level. So you understand that the child encounters the sexual harassment for the first time. And so she is transformed as a woman. She is no more a girl, she has experience, so she is considered to be a woman. So slowly, how even Esperanza is taken from childhood to experience. It's like I always associate this song of innocence to song of experience. Uh, s- that is the from innocence to experience. The child is transformed, and so how the adolescent age affects the child, and I would always wonder that what happened to those parents where the children are like this, and not much focus is given to the parents' side. Okay, especially only the few fathers in the novel, the few fathers who are dominating in the novel, those parents, their mention is there. But other than that, I couldn't find other parents whose focus, especially Sally or Esperanza, mother and father, had little bit of insight in one or two places, but not much. Mostly the girl is out of the home, especially mingling with other children, other friends, neighbors, and she's able to even notice a woman uh, who wants to get coconut and guava juice only on Tuesdays. Only on Tuesdays she would be able to get that, because those days her husband will be away and she'll be waiting at the window side to ask for some small child to buy her those juices. So she can't come out. She's caged like a bird. She doesn't
Sumati,
have
two
any
more
freedom. So
minutes. Two
is
more minutes. 2 more minutes. Is 2 more minutes
okay, so
okay? Right.
yes, few minutes. So.
Right.
So you understand that women are actually harassed sexually, as well as some women are kept in the home itself, like home arrest. And this woman is not allowed outside because she looks very beautiful. And this man, husband, actually is afraid that this woman would run away with any other man. So that kind of fear is there. So what, there comes a question, what makes a man a real man? Okay, so that the other things, I would say that when you talk about this garden, monkey garden, I come to realize that I can associate it with Bible, biblical reference. When you say that transformation from innocence to experience, the same thing had happened with Adam and Eve in biblical reference. In biblical reference, I bring this under this. And another woman, you find this Rosa Vargas, who's under tragedy because her husband is deserted. Her husband has deserted her, and they have too many children also to manage with, and she is in poverty and in grief. All these things had made Esperanza feel that she has to choose her own career, especially even other girls like not Mira, I'm sorry, another one girl who actually wants to marry a man like an imaginative, in an imaginative way, like Cinderella. There is a reference to Cinderella. And how this biological changes are brought is there is a vignette especially named Has. There is a vignette especially named Hips. All these things shows how a girl transformed herself into a woman, how she changes into a woman, and she is able to feel her womanhood when she was able to even see Sally being raped in the garden right in front of her, and she was unable to do anything against the boy. And that had made feel very really guilty and ashamed of happening things happening around her, but she was not able to. She has become one of the victims. She was not able to do anything against it. But later you understand that she wants to stand out. As even when I read Jane Austen's novel, I'm not against her, but when I read Jane Austen's novel, there comes a view that women have to be like this. Women have to discuss, women have to gossip, women have to talk about how to marry a man, women have to talk about how to attract a man, or how to engage a man, how to dance with a man. I'm totally against that. And even Esperanza, even when she wears Cinderella shoes, she compares one type of shoe with Cinderella shoes. Where she dances, she is able to identify herself as a woman. Now she is no more a girl and she is grown up, and she has identified herself as a woman. And when you come to read as a writer, what are the important things that you find is later she leaves Chicago. She has even written poems which she has shared with so many women, and so many women have inspired her to write poems. All those things are narrated. And towards the end, I can even say that start reading the novel from the end, the last vignette, which says that how Sandra Cisneros right away started writing the novel. Okay, let me read the last page and finish off this session. Okay, um, so let me read the last page. The last page is Mango says goodbye sometimes. Mango referring to the Mango Street. I like to tell stories. I tell them inside my head. I tell them after the mailman says, "Here is your mail. Here is your mail," he said. I make a story for my life. For each step my brown shoe takes, I say, and so she trudged up the wooden stairs, and her sad brown shoes taking her to the house she never liked. I like to tell stories. I'm going to tell you a story about a girl who did not want to belong, to the roots, who did not want to belong to the society that she lives in, who did not want to belong to her own house, her own parents. Okay, so we didn't always live on Mango Street. Before that, we lived on Loomis on the third floor, and before that, we lived on Keeler. Before Keeler, it was Paulina. But what I remember most is Mango Street, said sad red house, the house I belong but do not belong to. And I put it down on paper, and then the ghost does not ache so much. The ghost does not ache so much. So much of light you can put on this. It's like creative sickness. When I explain this line or when I think of this, it's like creative sickness. When I don't write something, I become sick. Even Freud has talked about daydreaming and creative writing. And before reading that part of Freud's essay, even I had a mind that all the time sitting and dreaming in the class, long times of dreaming, when somebody sits and talks near you and you don't even bother about them, and you are just in your own world. It's a part of your creative sickness. And she says that the ghost doesn't ache so much. The ghost she's referring to is the urge within her to write more. She does not hold me with both arms. She sets me free. One day I will pack up my bags of books and paper. One day I will say goodbye to Mango. I am too strong for her to keep me here forever. One day I will go away. Friends and neighbors will say, "What happened to that Esperanzo? Where did she go with all these books and papers? And why did she march so far away?" They will not know. They will not know I have gone away to come back. For the ones I left behind, for the ones who cannot come out. She says that definitely she will come back to the same place with a lot of memories, as well as she will recall her own place with a lot of memories in further novels. And that's all for today. And I thank all the delegates for giving me this opportunity to present this book review. Thank you so much. And if you have any questions, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Sumadhi, for that wonderful review. You gave us a wonderful insight into something, a refreshingly new novel for us, because I haven't read it personally. Thank you for that. Indeed, I shared some of the pages from this book on our reading group also this morning. It was so simple and so elegant, the book, the way she has narrated it. Any questions for Professor Sumadhi? Just one question, because we have a last participant, finally a student of QMC, Ms. Senivel, giving us a brief short review on her book, R.J. Palacios' Wonder. If there is any question for Professor Sumadhi, you can unmute yourself, introduce and ask your question. So thank you, Professor Sumadhi, for that wonderful session with us. Thank you. We cherish it
Thank you,
much.
sir.
Thank you. Now over to Miss
Thank you.
Senevel. Yes, finally a
Thank you
student.
so much.
English, yes.
Thank you so much. Am I audible, sir?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. A great evening to all the sublime personalities, and thank you, Dr. Rufus, sir, and thank you, Dr. Maria Preeti Srinivasan, ma'am, HOD Department of English, Queen Mary's College, for suggesting my name. And the novel I've chosen to review today is Wonder. I personally think that when precepts, emotions, and kindness meet, the end product is actually wonder. Before beginning into the review, I want to talk a little about Augie Palacio. So what really made Palacio to write this particular novel is she presently lives in Brooklyn, New York, and when she was at the ice cream store with her 2 young children, there was a little girl with severe facial difference. And on seeing that little girl, her younger son started crying. In order to avoid the awkward moment, she abruptly left the place. And later she regretted that she should have consumed that moment to as a moment of wisdom, that she should have taken her little sons to that little girl and let them talk with her and teach them that there was nothing to be afraid of. And later, this inspired her to write this novel. So this novel, Wonder, is about a little boy named August Pullman, who who was born with a severe deviant face, and because of that, he needs to undergo more than 27 surgeries. Owing to that, he was homeschooled till then, and now he's 10 years old, and the parents think that it's better to let him to go to a full-time school, because being a middle school student, it will be new for all the new kids, so it would be easier for him to acquaint with other children. And the novel is about this little boy August journeys through friendship, betrayal, courage, and kindness. The style of the novel is really beguiling, because the author has written this novel in first person, multiple points of view, and the voice was given to August Pullman, the central character, his elder sister Olivia Pullman, and the friends of August, Summer and Jack, and also Olivia's boyfriend and Olivia's best friend, Justin and Miranda, are also given voices to express their points of view. And fascinatingly, this novel, even though it has great philosophical tone, it yet maintains a very light and funny and very positive aspect throughout the novel. So the author herself expressed that it was a key aspect to maintain a positive note and to end the novel in a very happy note. And the big another impressive way about this writing is the artistic capturization of emotions by Augie Palacio. So the novel itself begins with August Pullman saying that, I know I'm not an ordinary 10-year-old. I mean, sure, I do ordinary stuff like I eat ice cream, I ride my bicycle, I play ball, I have an Xbox. Stuff like that makes me ordinary, but I feel ordinary in the inside. But I know ordinary kids don't make other ordinary kids run away screaming in the playgrounds. Ordinary kids don't get stared at wherever they go. Similarly, he says that if I have a magic lamp and I could make one wish, I would wish for a face that would be never noticed by anyone at all. And similarly, he says that like the compass needle always pointing to the north, wherever he goes, people's eyes always point at him. So all these reflect his exasperation. This child is going through something that he has an exceptional face, and he needs to face a world which doesn't know how to face him back. And Olivia Pullman, his elder sister, she's in the verge of frustration, but she's a very understanding girl. She feels that in the Pullman universe, August the sun, me and mom and dad, planets orbiting the sun, the rest of our family and friends are asteroids and comets that float around the planets orbiting the sun. And similarly, she finds that she doesn't feel sad about her brother being the specially cared child, because she says that after you've seen someone else going through all that, it's kind of crazy for you to complain over not getting the toy you had asked for, or your mom missing a school play. So the capturization of emotions is so intimate that a reader can connect with the author and what she's trying to say. And the other aspect, what I like very much about this particular novel is I think that this novel stands in the spine of its a spine made up of precepts. So if I could borrow the words of the author, precepts are anything that makes us take decisions, that guide us, that can motivate us. And throughout the novel, we come across so many precepts. So the teacher of English in the middle school, Mr. Brown, he says that when given the choice between being kind or being right or being kind, choose kind. So this particular precept has inspired globally the choose kind movement. And similarly, the Mr. Brown says that our deeds, our monuments, and August reflects upon this thought that our deeds outlast our mortality. Like Egyptian pyramids are built to honor pharaohs. Like people build monuments for heroes to honor them after they die. People also build monuments for us instead of stones. They build monuments for us out of memories they have of you. And August says, which is another take-home message for us, is I think there should be a rule that everyone in this world should get a standing ovation at least once in their life, because we all overcome the world. And there's another favorite character of mine in this novel, Justin, Olivia Pullman's boyfriend. He has a very depressing thought about August, because he thinks that what did this little child do to deserve the face he has now? And he feels that is this universe a giant lottery? You buy a ticket, and whether it's a good ticket or a bad ticket, it's all up to you. It's all random. And then he feels that no, it's not all random. If it's all random, then the universe would abandon us completely, which the universe doesn't. It takes care of its most fragile creatures in a way we can't see. And further, he adds that of course it is a lottery, but the universe makes it even out in the end. And as the novel progresses, there's this nature retreat where all the children of the 5th grade go on a hiking and camping trip. And this August Pullman is bullied by a bunch of 7th graders from other school who has also come to the same trip. And all the while, the classmates of August Pullman who had shunned him came to his rescue, stood up for him and protected him. And when August returned back home, he sepulchrally asked his mother whether there would always be bullies to torment him throughout his life. And his mother said that, of course, there'll always be bullies, but what she believes in is there are more good people in this planet than bad people, and good people will always look after for each other and take care of each other, which is another take-home message for all of us. And the reason why I chose young adult literature is because of the moral literacy it possesses in it. And so towards the end, this August Pullman becomes one of the honorary students of the school, and he's given one of the greatest medals of the school, which is the Henry Ward Beecher Prep Award. And in the convocational address, the director of the middle school, Mr. Tashman, says that he quotes from a particular book of J.M. Barrie, The Little White Bird. He says that what matters much is being little kinder than is necessary. And he reflects upon this thought that what really impressed him is the concept that being kinder than is necessary, that it reminds us that we as human beings carry within us not only the capacity to be kind, but the very choice of being kind. And he says that kindness, character, friendship, and courage alone makes us human beings. The other day I was watching this documentary on orangutans, and I found that more than 90% of orangutans' genetic code and human genetic codes are matching. The only thing that distinguishes human beings from orangutans are empathy, creativity, kindness, and of course, language and literature. So when speaking about kindness, I once again thank all the eminent dignitaries for being so magnanimously kind to me, for giving this opportunity. Thank you so much.
Amazing, Ms. Sanyavale. You were really amazing, full of life. In fact, we had a parallel discussion going on our group also, that, you can never find such passionate speaker of literature. You are great. We all admire you, appreciate you. You stole all our hearts, right? Thank you. Last, but literally, you are amazing, right? Any questions for Ms. Sanyavale? You can unmute yourself and you can ask her.
So Rufus.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, no questions. I just want to appreciate her. I think she would be the right person to be the professor. I wish her to be the professor soon, right? Okay, because you need to serve the student fraternity, right? My best wishes. Amazing, amazing, amazing. I didn't expect this from a student, right? Amazing, fantastic.
Thank you so much, sir. God's grace and your blessings.
Yes, actually, the blessings come from a senior professor like Professor Avicii Krishnan. It will really happen for you. So you are doubly blessed, right? Thank you so much, Professor Avicii Krishnan. Any other comments for Ms. Sanyavel?
Hello, sir. Ramurthy
Yes,
here.
sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Welcome, sir.
No questions as such, but full of life. The way she spoke, the way she presented, the energy that she, what do you say, she spawned out, right? That was quite very amazing. And as the previous person said, she is one teaching material.
Thank you so much.
She is one teaching material. I can see that. We have been through this. All of us, all teachers know. We can identify who can be in that particular bracket of, building up the next generation. So I can say that after us, the next generation is ready to take it up.
Wonderful.
And
That's
she
a wonderful blessing. Yes.
One of a kid who can take it up.
Wonderful.
And the future is in safe hands.
God's grace and your blessings, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And that comes from a very senior teacher.
Hello. And sir, I found a question that.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, hi. I'm Anjana here. So I just wanted to thank Ms. Sanyavel for choosing a young adult novel, because I think that's a very underrated genre right now, because there's so many books out there which deal with a lot more emotions, I think, because many novels exhaust most of what you're dealing with, but a young adult goes in so much deeper, so much angst also. And the way Augie deals with everything, you really brought it out so well. So I was very happy to see that. But most importantly, thank you for representing young adult literature here.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
That was a wonderful observation. Wonderful observation, ma'am. Thank you, Professor Anjana. Yes. Any other observations?
Hello, this is Amita. I really loved your presentation. I just wanted to, and also I've read this book and I love it a lot. What strikes me the most about this book is how it like transcends from the young adult genre, and it's something that I feel people of all ages should read. So I want to know what you think about children's literature, about young adult fiction. Like, do you think the bracket restricts people from other ages reading it, or what are your comments on this?
Thank you so much, ma'am, for raising that beautiful question. What I personally believe is a game of there's this one favorite personality who's very eminent dignity in the field of English literature, whom I worship, and this person has said a game of Quidditch can teach you more than a classroom can teach you. So what I think is young adult literature has so much to tell you, because Harry Potter can tell you so much. There are so many underlying meanings if we are keen enough to unravel all those meanings. We can find really great meanings of a life. And I think young adult literature has this one key ingredient to guide the human human spirit, because there's this one favorite dialogue between Dumbledore and Harry Potter I love so much. He says that somehow, Harry, the human race has mastered the art of mistaking comfort to goodness. If we are to reflect upon this, we can speak over and over and on and on and on. We can reflect for pages and pages. We can do thesis on this. So young adult literature really has so much to say, but people think that it is very childish. But I think juvenile literature is full of life. It's full of messages.
Amazing. Thank you for that excellent question, Ms. Amita, and for that wonderful answer. Thank you. Right. And this is exactly what we need. These interactions, these wonderful, lively interactions, not being harsh, not being critical. These are very casual, cool, relaxed evenings where we don't judge anyone, but we appreciate, celebrate literature for the books that they have chosen, for the points of view that they are giving us. And Ms. Sanyavel, you literally made our day. Thank you so much. Right. So, Thank you. Thank you. Now, we come to the end of the session. I just have one, I'll just take a couple of minutes and pay my hour on behalf of all of us here in this little, group in the virtual meet. Let me offer my condolences and rich tributes to Shri S.P. Balasubramaniam, who passed away today. The rich legacy that he has left behind for all of us, over 5 decades of enthralling all of us. Right from my baby days, I've listened to his voice, and all of us, we have been enriched and enthralled in every other way for more than 5 decades, and 40,000 songs is a world record, a Guinness record. And so if there is anyone who would like to share a song, right, just one song, from SPB sir's rich legacy that he has left us, you can just, give us an introduction to the song or tell us the song, and then we'll wind up for the day. Just 1 or 2 maximum, right, we'll have. After that, we'll call it a day.
And sir, may I also add one point here? He is one soul, I'll probably put it like that, soul, who has sung across all religions. He has never shied from, singing for a particular religion, or will be singing only for a. He has sung, all the songs were cutting across religion. So I wish his soul finds peace.
Wonderful, sir. Wonderful, Professor Ramamurthy. Thank you for that observation. Anybody else? So thank you so much for a wonderful, engaging, enthralling evening for all of us here at the Books and Coffee Meet. If any of you feels that you have a book, a favorite book of yours to be presented, to be shared, you can always message us personally. We will definitely get in touch with you. 100% we'll get in touch with you. You need to just give us a photograph of yours and the topic or the book title, and we'll absorb you in any of the upcoming sessions that we have in the coming days. That's all for now from all of us. Next Friday, same 6 o'clock in the evening, we'll all meet again. Thank you for joining us this evening. Thank you so much.